Hello and welcome to Make Ideas Reality, the podcast. This is a podcast dedicated to everyday creative heroes making their ideas reality that wouldn't necessarily get their story heard. I hope to inspire you with their stories, give you courage to leave your comfort zone, think big, and be the badass creator you are meant to be. I'm Justin White, aka The Garage Avenger. Let's do this! Hello and welcome to Make Ideas Reality, the podcast. Today's guest has engraved her way into the hearts of many. Your eyes will be fixated on the beauty of her work, and like their... I can't even say it. You know what it feels like I'm saying? I'm saying like you're putting someone's balls in the vase. That's what I'm thinking about every time I say this.
Well, if you need to think on it, and you can't splice it into what we already did, just let me know, because even if you need to just pop on for a minute and redo it, that's fine.
No, I'm gonna do it in a second. Just give me a second. I just now I got this image of someone's nuts just getting crushed in a vice. Oh Jesus! All right. Hello and welcome to Make Ideas Reality, the podcast. Today's guest has engraved her way into the hearts of many. Your eyes will be fixated on the beauty of her work, like they're secured in a ball vise. Her work has the power to transform something standard and boring into a family heirloom. Welcome to the show, Jennifer Bower from J Bower Engraving.
Thank you for having me. What a nice welcome.
Now, a lot of people that listen to this podcast probably follow you, and I think that's kind of a cool thing just to say in general. But I thought in the off chance that people don't know who you are, I thought I'd just give you a little chance to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit of who you are and what you do.
Okay. My name is Jennifer Bower. I'm from Northern Michigan, and I'm a traditional hand engraver. My primary medium is working in metal, so I specialize in engraving jewelry, hand tools, anything really that has a solid metal surface. I can add artwork to, so I use that kind of as my canvas to engrave anything from a unique design to personalizing things with names or initials. It's really up to the customer, what they're looking for it as far as the commission work I take. And then I do a lot of freehand engraving of items that I come across that I find inspiring. And I give a lot of my work away, and I do sell a lot of my work as well. I started in this about, I believe it was about 12 years ago now that I started dabbling in engraving. It began really with a love and admiration for art and calligraphy. I grew up doodling and drawing in notebooks, and also having a love of jewelry and old things. And a lot of the jewelry I had kind of acquired as a kid through garage sales and antiques stores, and things I inherited from my mother had hand engraving on it. And I didn't really know a lot of the history behind hand engraving and how it got there, but I was very curious about it. So about 12 years ago, I was exposed to some hand engraving. I saw some knives and guns that were engraved, and I was very fascinated by that and got interested in learning more about that and learning how to apply that to jewelry, which later kind of morphed into what I'm doing now, which is more hand tools and specialty items.
Yeah. And I found your work a few years ago and I was like mesmerized by the kind of beauty of it. And, I had sort of no idea really what it took to engrave something, but I knew like it took a fair amount of skill. Like I was not going to go pick up something and just create something as beautiful as what you do. And I found, an admiration for what you're doing. And then just seeing what you've done in some of your work, like turning something quite mundane, like a padlock or a wood plane, into something beautiful, like nearly a functional, beautiful piece of art. Um, I really admire that. I just think it brings like a sense of beauty to the world, weirdly. And I think the fact that, like I mentioned in the intro, that you could turn something that was quite normal into something that could potentially be a family heirloom and just be passed down through generations and generations. And that's your artwork. And I think that's super powerful that your work has the potential for that. And I just want to say it's awesome.
Well, thank you. That's my favorite part of my job as an engraver. I get the most excited actually about transforming those everyday objects. I think traditionally, historically, you look at engraving and you see it on armor and guns and knives and swords and these really, big pieces. And I love doing hand planes and locks in particular because I know they're going to be used in someone's shop or seen every day versus a special rifle or a special knife or something like that.
Mm,
So I really love seeing the tools that I've engraved actually being used in people's shops. I love to see that and to see a tool that they've already that was special to them that they've invested something into to make it even more special, and to become an heirloom. A lot of the hand planes I've engraved, the woodworkers have told me, I'd like to hand this down to my son someday or my grandson. I've even engraved some for newborn babies of woodworkers. They'll order a special plane and have me engrave their child's name and birth date and then something real fancy onto it, which I think is so cool. Instead of, remember those old trophies with the bronze baby or the bronze baby shoes you put the birth date on? It's just
yeah.
going to sit on a shelf. But the hand planes, they'll send me pictures later of their 3 or 4 year old in the shop using this little tiny hand plane that they have their name on. And that is really special to me to see
Uh,
that, to be a part of that.
Amazing. Really amazing. And that's got to be like for the fulfillment you get from that. I would love to have work like that, to be perfectly honest. Like I just got to be better at one thing.
Yes, it is really special. Anytime I'm doing something that's commemorative like that, it just it's very I use the word honor. It just feels like an honor to me to be asked to do that. I have this idea that I want engraving for, a special tool to commemorate my retirement or a special lock to just be the final touch on a cabinet I'm building. And so to be a part of that and have it be really special to the person who's commissioning it, I feel like that is a privilege for me as an artist to be chosen to work on those things. So I don't take it for granted. I really appreciate that they seek out my work
Mm.
for that type of commemoration or memorial. It's especially gratifying for me.
I thought, why don't we take it a little bit back? You mentioned your mother's things having been engraved earlier, and I thought, why don't we go back to where you physically just started engraving and talk us through a little bit of that process, the journey you've been on from starting to where you are now.
Sure. I ordered some gravers, which a graver is essentially a sharp blade that's in a handle. And so I ordered some traditional uh, gravers for hand engraving and got them and had no idea what I was doing. I just gouged it into some metal and it looked terrible. And then I learned that you have to sharpen them to certain angles. And um, it just was a process of kind of trial and error for me. I was just so curious about cutting the metal and how it worked. So at first, I just experimented with the gravers. And my husband had some experience in sharpening tools and had suggested, hey, let's try sharpening them on some oil stones. And so we would sharpen them to different angles and I would practice. Um, and I really just started practicing cutting straight lines and circles over and over again until I was consistent in that. Um, and that sounds very basic and easy, but it's actually very difficult when you're learning to engrave, just because it was a new tool for me, learning to keep steady hand control. But once I started to see consistency in the lines and in the circles, then I started practicing lettering, different kinds of fonts, different kinds of shapes, and then eventually kind of transitioned into my own drawings and designs and fonts and different monograms that I would make for people. So it really just it started out of curiosity and just kind of ebbed and flowed into learning a little bit more here and there when I had time and focusing initially just on lettering. For me, it was good practice and good goals to decide. And just instead of doing useless metal plates of practice, I decided it would be nice to work on some silver jewelry because silver is soft. It's an easier metal to cut. So I would do a lot of different necklaces and pendants that had different initials on it. And that was really kind of where I started to hone my technique into making those look crisp and nice. And then when I felt like I was doing well with that, I experimented more with the artistic end of the engraving, which is more what I do now as far as the flourishing scroll work designs and textures and different things like that that I incorporate into the tool engraving.
Yeah, I mean, engraving is quite a, let's call it traditional art form.
Hmm.
And I guess there has to be quite a lot of um, people out there that are very traditional in the way they do the work.
Hmm.
Um, are you a stickler for the rules, you know, and doing the way things are supposed to be done?
I'm not. And I cringe when people refer to me as a master engraver because I'm really far from it. I've been doing this for over 10 years, but I'm not a master, especially not of traditional technique. And I honestly couldn't tell you the terms for those techniques and what those techniques are because I was never schooled in those. Um, it's not a skill that I can learn locally. I would have to go somewhere to study under a traditional hand engraver. And not that I would necessarily have been opposed to doing that when I became interested, it just wasn't something that was available. So I was curious more about just figuring it out on my own. And finding what works for me and the applications in which I wanted to use it. So I'm sure I don't do things according to the traditional method, but I'm okay with that because I look at it as a tool to execute my ideas artistically. And if perhaps I were using a different medium artistically, let's say painting or sketching, it's beneficial to have a teacher, but I wouldn't necessarily want to copy every method that they did um, for their artwork. I think I would be worried I'd be too overly influenced by that. And that's kind of how I felt with engraving. I really wanted to kind of figure it out on my own and achieve my own look and my own style in my work. So even though I don't feel quote unquote qualified, perhaps in the traditional skills and techniques of engraving, I do consider myself an engraver, and I feel like I have a good grasp on the techniques that work really well for me.
Yeah, and I mean the fact that you feel confident in what you do is more important than anything else.
Mhm.
But I kind of have to ask this question, being that engraving is quite traditional. Have you had critics come and criticize the way you do your work or
Mhm.
things like that?
I have. There are different tooling. There's different tooling you can use in engraving. So you can use a traditional hand push method where you're just using the force of your own hand to push the tool and remove metal. You can use a hammer and chisel method where the hammer is helping you tap and chisel accordingly, just as you would with wood, but you're doing it into the metal. It's the same concept. And then there are also more modern methods with air gravers, and that is a blade that's in a handpiece, and there's a pulse of air that will pulse the blade. All that is doing is taking the place of the backhammering that you would do with your other hand. So the person engraving is still fully hand engraving. It's hand carving, but that carving is just being helped along by that basically just a little puff of air. It's a pneumatic hammer.
Hmm.
So there are people who are critical of the different ways of doing it. Some people say, well, that's not true hand engraving because you're using a powered device. Um, yes and no. It's an air hammer. There's like a puff of air that's helping you. You're still the artist doing all the work. Um, and I had heard a master engraver talking about it who was a master of hammer and chisel engraving, and now he almost strictly uses air hammer engraving. And he basically said, it's the same thing. You're going to get the same essential result, but it does save your hands as far as just the tooling. It can really take its toll on your wrists doing everything by the force of your own hand. So there are some people who they want to know up front, well, what did you use to engrave that? And it's almost like if you used an air powered engraver, that it to them it takes away from the art, when really if you look at something that's done with an air hammer or that's hand hammered, the only difference, if you look under a microscope, there's a little teeny difference to the cuts, and it's so minute. But to some traditionalists, that's enough to really divide the two worlds of engraving. I do a mixture of all of that. So on one project, I could use all kinds of different methods. I'm not real snobby one way or the other what I do, and I do all different kinds of methods for hammering in the blank space as well. So there are, like I said, there are traditionalists that really feel unless you're only doing hand push, that's the only way, or you're only doing hand hammer and chisel, that's the
Hmm.
only way. To me, there's a big difference because in the term machine engraving, I think more as it relates to CNC or laser engraving,
Hmm.
where it's done absolutely with a machine. You're putting whatever the object is under the path of a machine, and you're pushing a button, and the machine is doing the work. If someone uses an air-powered graver, that is not a machine doing the work. They are physically chiseling out that metal with that tool. So it's only giving their hand a little extra oomph to remove the metal, and that's truly all it is. So it really is hand engraving, and the work is a reflection of that person doing it. It is line by line, one at a time. It is not a fast method at all. It takes hours and days and weeks to engrave large items.
Hmm. I mean, have you ever had to deal with actual critics of your work, or are people just kind to you?
Oh, I think there's critics everywhere for everybody. When I started gaining followers on Instagram, my work had been shared. I had been collaborating with other artists. I had a feature article in the Wall Street Journal once featuring my work, which gave me a boom of publicity. So within that boom of new followers, there were some critics. And generally, I can kind of let that roll. I think there's just going to be critical people who like to make comments, but there was one that kind of got to me, I think, more than any criticism I've had. And it was because it came from another hand engraver. And I didn't know this person personally at all. And I had looked at his page, and his work was just extraordinary. He was very much a master of the craft of a highly trained engraver,
Mm.
and just beautiful, beautiful work. Um, and he had sent me a private message, kind of with this undertone of, how did you get so many followers? And I just felt like that you was in flashing letters. Like,
What do you mean a quiet undertone? That was that was like a right in your face, like, what the fuck? Like,
yeah, that's
how did
exactly how I felt.
you of
Um,
all people, with your horrible work, get
mhm.
so many followers? Yeah, I mean,
And so that was tough. And I replied to him, I've never called myself a master engraver. I have never, ever tried to promote this image that I know everything about engraving and I'm the expert, because I do not feel that way. And I said, I have shared my work and what I do. I use social media to show people I was actually carving these things out. I am a hand engraver. I'm doing it by hand, because a lot of people look at it and they think it's done by CNC or laser. They don't understand, yes, there are hand engravers.
mm,
And I was honest with him in the fact I've never had a master engraver offer to teach me.
mm.
I had never had a master engraver say, you know what, you're pretty good at that, but you might want to hone this technique by looking into this or looking into that. Instead, it was just so critical. And he did come back and apologize and said, um, he needed to look at himself as his own competition and not other people. And I think he felt somewhat remorseful. He did apologize, but I thought that was so strange to me that someone would even reach out and basically say, my engraving's better than yours, so how come you're popular and I'm not? So it just felt very petty to me. Um, and it did kind of reiterate to me, why am I sharing? Am I sharing because I want to be seen as an expert, or I want to be seen as the best engraver in the world? And that's not why I'm sharing. I'm sharing to show the person behind the art, the
Mm.
process behind the art, to show people I'm a real human being in my shop, making pieces one at a time, one cut at a time, and giving people who might not be exposed to hand engraving a little behind the scenes look at what that is, um, which I think has been really good for me as an artist, because it's drawn people into engraving who otherwise really might not have been interested, but they see it more as relatable to them, maybe as an artist or a maker in some sense, relating that, I might not be a metal worker, but I can watch Jenny and see the different steps that go into her work, and I can appreciate that, because they might be a woodworker or some other type of metal worker, and they can kind of feel a connection with me and my process,
Mm.
as well as their own and what goes on in their shop.
And I think you bring out a valid point with regards to sharing the journey, like sharing your work, is not just your potential, a pretty picture of what you've done. You've got yourself in there, you've got your likes and dislikes, you got your lifestyle, and people are attracted to people that just own who they are. And I feel like that's you. And I that critic for me sounds like he wasn't sharing any of that type of thing. He wanted to let the work speak for itself.
Mhm. Mhm.
And you can't compare the two. People are attracted by people, not pretty things.
Mhm.
So
Well,
uh
and I found it when I showed a finished piece all the time, it didn't really tell a story. It was just this object that might not make sense to people. And to me, I love to see what goes into building something or what's behind the craft. Just
mm,
kind of a peek behind the curtain of what's going on. So that's how I started on social media, truly, was just documenting, and I still do that. It's what's going in my shop at my bench. I'm taking video clips on my phone as I'm working and using those to just give an honest view of what's happening here, rather than the polished glamour shot every single time of a finished piece.
yeah, but for me, it's you're keeping this like thread of creativity through like everything you're doing. So like that's where it all ties in together.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter. You can post a picture of you out fishing or something, right? But it's part of you, and maybe you're using something you made on that
Hmm.
fishing trip, and that's all part of it. So I think that's for those people that are not sharing all those small things, like you can see from Jennifer's work, like if you go onto Instagram, you'll see that she says a lot of different stuff, just not her work. And I think it's valuable for followers to understand who she is as a person. So I would really try and get behind who you are as a person in your posting and trying to let people know who you are.
Hmm.
Hmm. Um, I need to ask some questions of you. What is going on with Harrison Ford in there in the background?
um, so I am sitting in my workspace. My workbench is behind me. So what you're looking at, I have a very large action figure of Han Solo. I think I have a couple small action figures. Um, Inside my house, my home decor is very normal and somewhat minimal. But when I was a kid, I collected action figures. Specifically love Star Wars and Superman. So I have quite a few different little bits of nerdity, I call them, that didn't really have a place in my house. So when my loft workspace became a reality, I decided to bring those out here and put them where I could see them rather than just having them packed away in boxes. So my workspace is a mixture of tools and action figures.
I love it. I love it. Now, you need to tell me what is the love affair with Harrison Ford? Because this needs, like, I just saw a post a couple of weeks back. You had purchased a flannel shirt that matched a flannel shirt that Harrison Ford was probably wearing in, I don't know, in the 80s or something. I don't know.
Well, that was actually just a funny, ironic coincidence. The flannel shirt I was wearing, I purchased at an old man's garage sale for a quarter. And it was
That's
just
so awesome.
because I like flannel too. I love plaid flannel. And so I had bought it as a work shirt and I've had it for years. And I think it's just an old Sears flannel shirt. And I was looking through an article about Harrison Ford, and there was this old picture of him as a carpenter from the 80s. And I realized, oh my goodness, that's my old man flannel. So I was really excited that I had a flannel that matched Harrison Ford. So, yes, I posted a picture of that. I think everybody who knows me got a good chuckle out of that, that
And
we had matching flannel.
what is it specifically about Harrison Ford that you have a love affair with?
Um, I think on the outset, people would assume it was a romantic infatuation, but in fact, it's not. I just remember maybe one of my most definitive movie experiences as a kid was seeing Indiana Jones for the first time. And I was just so sucked into the story and the adventure. And I just thought, wow, it would be so cool to be Indiana Jones or be his sidekick. And I've kind of felt that way, the same way about Han Solo. And it's just evolved into, I just really became a fan of Harrison Ford's movies and have been for my whole life. So I don't know. I liked the sense of adventure, I think, as a kid. And maybe that's part of the fun of the action figures. You know, I look at those and I kind of remember what that felt like the first time I saw Star Wars or the first time I saw Indiana Jones. Just seemed like really exciting.
A lot of people that have dolls and like action figures and things like that, often will go to Comic Cons and, you know, do cosplay. Is that something you've done or are thinking of doing?
um, I hadn't gone to any Comic Cons at all or comic book conventions until just a few years ago. Um, there was a local group that decided to put on a Comic-Con convention here in my area where I live, and my brother and I thought it would be really fun to go. Our spouses think that we're a little bit crazy that we still like action figures, so they were not interested in going. So my brother and I went, and the first year we went, I said, you know, everybody dresses up for these. What should we do? And he said, well, I have a Wolverine sweatshirt. I'll wear that. And I said, okay. I think I have an old vest and I have a fake blaster. I'll dress up like a girl Han Solo. And we thought that was hilarious. So we went, had a great time. And then the next year we decided, hey, let's go back. But this year, let's actually make a costume. So that ended up being really fun for me because I decided if I'm going to do that, I'm going to incorporate metalwork and I'm going to share it on Instagram. I'll decide to make a component of the costume and then I'll share how I did that.
Mm.
Um, there's a guy named Adam Savage who was one of the hosts on Mythbusters.
Who's that guy? I don't know who he is.
I think everybody knows that name. So I love Adam Savage's Tested show on YouTube, and I like to see the one-day builds he makes. And a lot of times, those are components of costumes that he's going to wear to the big Comic-Con in California. So I kind of had that in the back of my mind. And so the first year that we decided to do costumes, I chose Wonder Woman, and I made her little tiara out of metal, and I engraved the cuff bracelets like her Wonder Woman
Yeah.
cuffs, except I decided I'm going to engrave those, and I sewed a costume out of scrap fabric that I had here in my shop, and I documented that process. And then last year I decided to make a costume based on the She-Ra cartoon that I liked when I was a 5-year-old girl. I had come across this old She-Ra poster that I had saved. It was like tucked in a book or something, and it fell out, and I thought, oh, that'd be really cool. I'll be She-Ra. And so She-Ra has this big headdress, tiara type thing that kind of flares out around her face. And I decided to go ahead and make that out of metal and try some different finishing techniques and hammering techniques that I'd never tried before. I hand cut all the pieces and I documented that on social media, and I actually hand engraved the whole tiara. So it looked like hers, but then I kind of put my own spin on it. And that was really fun to have a goal to finish it for the Comic-Con, but also just to kind of decide to try a few different techniques that I'd never tried before and see if they worked. And rather than just having an ambiguous project, it was nice to have a finish date with a goal to get it done for Comic-Con. So I had this super elaborate She-Ra costume, and my brother thought it would be hilarious to basically wear an inflatable He-Man suit. So we looked just so funny together because his just was ridiculous and mine was like crazy detailed, metal work and stuff. But we had so much fun together doing that. both working on the costumes and just being excited, and then going to the event together, and with our kids. So I think it's something we'll keep doing over time. And as our kids get older, then they can kind of work on their ideas for their costumes, which is really fun to watch them as little kids get ideas for what they want to be, and not just buy a costume off the rack, but they want to make their costumes too.
Yeah. And that creative process, teaching the kids that is super valuable because they'll be able to take that into whatever they want to do in the future. I think
Hmm.
it's awesome. That's something actually I want to talk about, a little bit of your creative process. How do you go, this is making ideas reality. So how do you go from an idea to, finished product? How can you talk through that process with us?
Sure. I think for me, there's probably two main ways. So, for example, with the Shira costume that I was just talking about, she was a character that had a certain look of a headdress and a certain costume. So I wanted to emulate that, but I also wanted to add my own twist to it. So I drew out my design for the headpiece on paper, and then I kind of sketched out an idea of what I thought it might look like engraved. So I had some loose sketches for that, because I needed the finished product to be recognizable as Shira
Mm.
from a distance as part of the costume, but then as someone was closer, they could see all of the detail within it. And I wanted it to feel like a representation of my work. Other projects might come about in a different way. So with the locks and vintage and antique tools I engrave, a lot of times I'll go to an antique store, to different garage sales or estate sales, and I'll just see different metal objects that I find really intriguing. And I'll buy them and bring them back to the shop. And sometimes they'll just sit on a shelf for a while, and I'll look at them and then think, okay, today I feel really inspired to engrave that lock that's been sitting there for a while. And I'll take that lock and I might just sit down and freehand engrave the whole thing, um, just as I'm inspired and the pattern comes to life right on the lock. Other times I might draw out a sketch and just take a look at the balance and shape of the piece and play around with the layout of my idea. And then I will do a rough sketch with a Sharpie or a dark pen or marker, sometimes in pencil, right onto the metal, depending the type of surface. I'm able to draw an outline right onto the piece and then go from there. And then a third creative process is when I'm working directly with a customer. Um, Sometimes a customer might have a specific logo or branding related to their business that they would like to incorporate. Um, but what's kind of neat about that is they want to incorporate that with my style of work as well. So, for example, I'm working right now with a woodworker who built this really neat workbench. And he said, could you engrave a nameplate for my bench that has my logo kind of centered in it, but then I would like your scroll work and your type of artistic filigree work around that. So I'll put together a sketch with my ideas and see if they kind of like the feel and direction that's going, and then I'll engrave the piece after that.
And I think that's, for me, like, I think it's really cool that you have the freedom when a customer comes to you to kind of do that. There's not very often, is it very often that people come to you as like, I want exactly this, or do they often say like, oh, just do it your style?
I think I learned really fast that the people that handed me something I want it to look exactly like that, that's probably not my clientele base.
Yeah, yeah.
Because if you have something with just a real specific picture in mind, that person might be expecting a laser engraving or a stamp or an etching based off of that exact image, and that's not what I do.
Mm.
I'm doing a hand rendering of whatever image I'm working with. And so I learned early on I didn't want to do real square block fonts because I just thought they looked bad by hand. Real straight line square fonts look fantastic with made by a stamp or a machine.
Yeah.
The beauty of hand engraving is the curvature and the cuts that can catch the light, and the different dynamic within those cuts that you can do with the tilt of your hand versus a machine blade's just going to be cutting one type of a cut. So I really prefer to do designs that have a little curvature to them, or if the customer might want something a little more square, how can I texture that piece to make the light catch so it just doesn't look flat? So it has allowed me to have an open dialogue with customers, and I'll be really honest and upfront. That's not my specialty style of engraving if it's something I'm not comfortable with. Or presenting tactfully, what would you think if we changed this around or we incorporated this? And a lot of times when I can kind of sketch out my idea, they're pretty quickly on board because they've
Mm.
already sought me out because they like my style of work. So in that sense, I've been really fortunate with the commissions I've taken.
And that's something, people are searching for you, searching for your work. And you don't necessarily put out work you don't like, right? Especially on Instagram. And I think that needs to be taken into account. Like if you're after money,
Hmm.
then you just do everything and everything, right? And
Hmm.
as you sort of said, you give away, you do swaps, and this is not really a huge money thing for you. You don't need to be a millionaire craving, right? So
No.
no, otherwise you'd have machines doing half of it whilst you did the hand stuff and
Sure.
all
And I
that.
think
So
it's a valuable lesson to learn early on when you're a craftsman or a maker or you're working with people on commission is being comfortable saying no. I do hate to say no. I hate to tell people no. But what you said earlier is exactly right. I had someone early on ask me, could you engrave an eagle with this banner and fireworks? It was like this really elaborate vision they had. And I personally don't really like doing animal engravings. It's just not something I enjoy or something I feel like I'm very good at. There are engravers who specialize in that kind of engraving.
hmm,
And I had to learn real quickly to just be confident in saying, no, that's not really the style that I do, or that's not a craft, an element of this work that I'm comfortable with. Because there are already people skilled at that. There are people who specialize in that, and that's what they do. And they know how to bring to life that vision. For me, it wasn't a vision I could connect with. And if I can't really connect with it, I'm not going to be able to execute it real well. So I need to be able to say no to the things that I feel like I'm not really qualified to do, or that I wouldn't want my name on, because I do look at it as a reflection of my artistic side and my creativity, and I want to feel good about putting my name on a finished piece.
yeah, and that's your brand, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking right now, I saw a post from Lindsay Murphy who was on this podcast a couple of weeks back, and
Hmm.
she said, I'm struggling to price my work. And like she can't do it. And I sort of sent a message to her and I said, I feel it's got to do with branding, like if you've got the people that are behind you and want your work, they'll pay for what it's worth.
Hmm.
um you know if you're gonna really compare, I feel like the big brands, like a Gucci freaking handbag is no better than it's made in the same factory, yet women will pay a gazillion dollars for that type of handbag. Why?
Hmm.
It's brand.
Mhm.
And that brand says something about them, so they feel and I think it's the same for your work, right? People who want to say they've got, one of Jennifer's, engravings will pay for it, you
Mhm.
because they value who you are and the work you do. So,
It
uh,
is so difficult to price to price, and I think that's just a common thread with a lot of artists, and craftspeople in general. It's difficult to know how to price your handwork, and, I do a mixture for my pricing based on a value of the skill because not everybody can hand engrave, so there is a value in that.
mm,
Um, how much time I'm going to have physically into the actual cutting of the metal, and how much time I'm going to have into the design work because sitting down and drawing designs and doing layouts to fit a specific piece of metal in a specific shape takes time. And I think we've all had those jobs that we very much undersold. And at the end, we're like, oh my goodness, I should have charged 4 times as much for that.
yeah,
So I try to be realistic. I'm told actually often that I don't charge enough for my work, which was a little startling to me at the beginning. And I know a lot of high end engravers charge much, much more than I do. Um, but I want to have a really realistic balance of what I think is a fair price for my work and also to not scare people away from it because I think sometimes people get this idea that it's an elite type of a craft and it must cost an astronomical amount of money to have a personally hand engraved commissioned item, and I don't want it to be that. I want it to be something that people aren't afraid to ask for a quote and to reply, "That's reasonable, that's something I can save for," or, "Yes, that's what I have in my budget," so that I can continue to work. I don't ever wanna be priced out so high that people are not interested in having me collaborate with them or do work for them.
yeah, because I think there's quite a few people in our community that would love to work with you, or or have something engraved by you. And it's kind of intimidating if you've got a extremely high you know price tag on your
Mhm,
work, and that makes it kind of a little bit inaccessible. So um I guess you got to know your customer base and your audience as well, so that you can maintain that lifestyle which you've built now. So
mhm,
it's really cool. And thanks for sharing that as well. I think it's valuable for a lot of people to sort of hear the side of pricing.
mhm,
Before we go into story time, I have one last question.
mhm.
Is what is your fascination with your Jeep?
My Jeep. Well, I drive a 1987 Jeep Grand Wagoneer with wood paneling, shag carpet, and corduroy and leather seats. And that was my dream car before it was hipster. So I feel like I have to say that because, they're on magazines now and commercials for this, that, and the other thing. But I was a child of the 80s who just thought that was the coolest car, because I loved the kind of romantic idea of packing a picnic and driving to the lake shore and, you know, listening to music with the windows down and the big seats that feel like you're riding on grandma's couch. So I always kind of wanted one, and there were a few that I'd see around locally, and it was just that same nostalgia every time I would see one. Oh boy, someday, someday. Well, they started becoming so popular within the last 10 years that I didn't think I'd ever own one because they're starting to just get crazy in price, especially if you can find any in Michigan that aren't completely rusted out
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because of the salted roads and
Mm.
the snow. And a lot of people had used them up. in my region, like they'd get one that was slightly used, and then it would become like their hunting camp vehicle, and they'd just trash it.
Hmm.
So they're just not easy to come across. And I had seen one parked alongside the road one day. I was taking a walk out by Lake Michigan, and I had my business card on me, and I put it on the windshield and wrote a note on the back. If you ever think of selling, give me a call.
Hmm.
And I had heard of people doing this, and I think I did that on 2 or 3 that I'd seen over the years. And a couple of years ago, I was here working in the shop, and a guy knocked on the door and said, "I'm ready to sell my truck." I was really confused. I'm not sure what you're talking about. And he said, "Well, you left your phone number on my Wagoneer a couple years ago." And I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. And I came out
Amazing.
the front door, and there was my dream Wagoneer. And he said, "Yeah, I know I could advertise it, and they're really popular, and I probably could get a little bit more money for it, but I know you want it. I know you want to enjoy it, and you're going to take care of it. And so I really want to give you the first chance at buying it." And his price was really reasonable, and I just jumped at the chance. I mean, my whole hand was tipped at that point. He already knew I loved the car.
Yeah, yeah.
But it wasn't a pristine, perfect show car. It's one that his family used, and he tinkered on in the weekends and replaced a lot of different things. And when I purchased it, he brought boxes of extra parts and just said, "Here, you can have everything that goes with it. And if you have any questions, if anything goes wrong, give me a call." And he lives around here, and if he sees me driving, he always honks and waves. And so I got my dream car, and I use that hashtag sometimes when I post pictures of it, Jenny got her dream car, because I feel like that every time I'm in it. I just love driving around in that Jeep. It's so much fun.
You know what it reminds me of? I grew up, in the 90s, so I'm a big Simpsons fan.
Okay.
And we used to watch it like every day, 6 o'clock in the evening was The Simpsons was on. And there was a car in The Simpsons called the Canyonero. And it looks like that. It's just it's so good. I want to sing the song nearly already. Like
It's so funny. And it's fun when I drive it too, because I'll be pulled up to a stoplight, and people will roll down the windows and just say, "I love your car. It's so cool." Or, I'll be at the beach, and somebody will come over and, would you mind if I just look inside and see what it looks like? And then they want to tell you like their story of remembering, if they had it or their parents had it, or, some trip they took in one like it. So it's a fun conversation piece as well.
it's so good. I just love it. It's classic, and I like I would probably, for me personally, it's the ugliest looking car, but but I would probably own it because of that. Because I just really think I would probably love it even more because it was like, for me, like the epitome of ugly is the wood paneling on the side, but at the same time, it's the most beautiful part of the car,
It's
right?
so nostalgic, and it's funny because I do love classic cars, and my taste is very eclectic, from steam cars to one-offs and resto mods. I really do. I love cars. Um, but what I like about this one is it's it's one that we could take adventures in. And when I first bought it, I had this old wooden box, and I had gotten a wood burner, and so I wood burned this design onto the side of the box, and it says "Adventures with Leo," because I named my Wagoneer Leo Marvin after the character in What About Bob, the movie, who drove one of these. And so we have this little box in the back seat, and it has paper and pens. And when we take an adventure, my daughter writes the date on one of the cards and says, "We took Leo and Marvin to the sand dunes, and we had a picnic," or "We went to the drive-in for the first time, and we had pizza and watched this movie." So we have this little record right in vehicle of all of the adventures that we've taken, which I thought would be a fun memory for her. When she's older, she can thumb through them and remember different trips we took in the old Wagoneer.
I love that. That is, that makes me want to do something like that with my
Oh,
kids.
she's so into it too. We forgot to write that we did, X, Y, and Z, and we
Mm.
got to make sure we write that down.
Ah, love it. All right, I feel like that was nearly story time, but we're going to go into story time
Sure.
anyway, regardless. So you ready?
Story time. She stared at the gown and thought, yes, this is something my husband would wear.
Okay.
Have you got
Well,
a story?
I have I am a magnet for embarrassing moments, so I was trying to filter through which one I would share. And this one actually kind of goes along with what we were talking about. I love cars, and I typically enjoy going to classic car shows and more of kind of the classic car era. But I had done some engraving work for a gentleman who is affiliated with NASCAR, and he's a famous individual. And I had done a few different engravings for him, and he contacted me one day and said, "Would you be interested in some passes as my guest to go to a NASCAR event?" And I had never been. And he said, "You can bring your husband or guest, whomever you'd like, and you'll be a guest of our company." And I said, "Okay, I think I would like to do that because I'd never done it before." So I asked my dad if he would go with me. And so we went to this event, and we had special VIP passes that we got to go um, in the garages beforehand and out on the track and everything, which was really a really unique experience. It was just the sights and sounds of everything that's happening. And before the race, just seeing them prep the cars and all the work that goes into it, and just kind of the dance of the crew working together. So my dad loves photography, and he had his camera with him, and we're back behind the scenes before the race, and we were a guest of a Chevy affiliated team. And before we went in, I noticed my dad was wearing a Ford hat, and I was like, "Dad, you can't wear a Ford hat for the guests of Chevy." So he took off his hat. We're looking around, and the race is about to start. And I said, "Before we go out, could you get my picture by one of the cars from the team?" And it was a particularly famous driver for one of the Chevy teams. And I was standing there to get my picture. My dad was taking forever lining up the picture, and there are people coming and going. And he kind of waved to the side to stop these two men from walking in front of me while he was taking the picture. And he said, "Just, stay there for a second." And out of the corner of my eye, I realized who he was talking to. And I thought, "Oh no, he doesn't know who they are." And it was Edsel Ford II and his son Henry, whom my dad had just asked not to step into the shot. So I was so mortified that he had asked the two Mr. Fords not to step into the picture, and they walked in front. And I said, "Mr. Ford, I'm so sorry." And he said, "Well, that's okay, but you're standing in front of the wrong car."
So good.
So then I got my picture with them, which I was completely red and embarrassed, but it was a really funny story. They were very gracious.
Oh, I love it. And there's nothing better than an embarrassing dad story. Like,
I have so many.
so good. All right, let's go into Inspiration Nation.
Yeah, yeah. Inspiration Nation. Uh, 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 uh.
This is our section where we give a bit of a shout out to the lesser known, as I like to call them, creative heroes. Have
Mhm.
you got anyone you want to give a shout out to?
Yes, I do. One of my creative inspirations is a gentleman named Greg Pennington, and Greg is a chair maker from Tennessee, and he specializes in traditionally handcrafted chairs, specifically Windsor chairs and rocking chairs. And I had an opportunity to take a class with him this past fall and go to his workshop and learn how to hand make a chair, which is truly from scratch. You start with pine and oak pieces and you form the spindles for the chair with draw knives and shaves, and you do it by hand. And Greg was just an incredible teacher. It was a wonderful experience, and it's a really cool experience being in his shop as well, because his entire shop is a timber frame building that he made himself. So he's just one of these guys that can do everything, and he's so humble about it. We were sitting in his shop talking and was mentioning something in there, and he said, "Oh, yeah, I made that with this, or I did that with this," and I'm just floored all the time at the things he can do. So he is somebody that just inspires me so much that I wanted to learn how to make a chair. So Greg Pennington, he's from Pennington Windsor Chairs, and he is on Instagram, and I think, and also has a website that shows his work.
Amazing. I'll make sure that I'll put the links in the show notes for you guys if you want to go check him out. And I've been watching a little bit on your Instagram as well, and that chair, and just watching how you used spoke shave to do the legs and spindles and stuff. I thought it was beautiful and amazing work. And I want to also say congratulations to you for doing woodwork and being amazing at it. Like, that's probably cool.
That was just so out of my wheelhouse. Working with wood and metal are two different, just totally different genres, really. And I had engraved a lot of hand tools and didn't have a lot of experience using them. So I actually had engraved a hand plane for Mr. Pennington, who I just mentioned, and I was able to use that as part of my chair build, which was really cool to use one of the tools that I had hand engraved in his shop, and just to really get hands-on with that whole process and be able to appreciate what goes into hand making a piece of furniture. It was just invaluable. I enjoyed it so much.
Yeah, I kind of had this in, like, before you mentioned that it was his hand plane, I kind of imagined like you brought your own tools and like, well, they're all like these real beautiful engraved tools. You're like, yeah, that suck on that, bitches. Look at all my tools. Like, I got all the pretty ones.
No, it was so funny. I didn't know Greg in person. We had never met. He had commissioned this hand plane, and it was so cool. When I walked in his shop, he had this beautiful, beautiful tool cabinet that, of course, he built. It's just stunning. And he had the hand plane on the top shelf, and he said, "Oh, watch this." And he had installed a special light to shine right on the hand plane.
No,
He was
no
just
way.
so proud of it. And I said, "That is just so flattering to you."
I mean, being that you've now done woodworking and like, you're gonna start forging yet, or like?
Oh, I would love to. I would love to. Blacksmithing is just fascinating to me. And I haven't really done any of that. So I'm very interested in just learning some of the basics. I've gone several times to various blacksmith shops in our area and watched people work. And I just think it is such an interesting thing to see. And I would definitely love to give that a try sometime.
Yeah, I was at Rasmus Lowen's blacksmith shop
Yes.
the other week, and you know, it's not that complicated. I mean, you heat it up and you whack it, but
Mhm.
I feel like it was the dexterous kind of things you have to do with your hands, the way you used to kind of learn how to turn the
Mhm.
tools and like hit at the right place, and then like, it's just that sort of hand movements that you kind of have to get used to,
Yes.
and I think that just takes time and practice. So that's
Yes. Another person who is really an inspiration to me with that is a gentleman named Seth Gould, and he's a blacksmith, traditionally trained, and he does also teach blacksmithing at a craft school. What I love about Seth's work, and I find so inspirational, is the attention to detail that he puts into his pieces. He has made just some spectacular things out of metal. I had the opportunity to see this lock mechanism that he made, and every single component he made by hand. And just the detail in the filing work, and I just couldn't believe it was like museum quality, timeless piece is going to be around forever. But a traditionally trained blacksmith who took that and turned his skills into expressing an art form in his own way. I mean, you think of a blacksmith and you think a lot of times of kind of the stereotypical dirty hands, guy fixing horseshoes and things, that you see in movies. And I think seeing some of the contemporary blacksmiths and how they're using that in art now is very fascinating to me, incorporating those traditional skills into a contemporary look. And I like Seth's work because he does that, and he also makes a lot of hand tools. He's kind of known for his hand tools, which have just a simply beautiful elegance to them. They're a functional tool, but they're just crafted in a way that they have such a beautiful balance. I mean, they just look, you just want to look at them and touch them. It's really interesting to me, the things that he makes.
This is Hack Attack! I will not apologize for this bad intro. Have you got any tips or tricks you want to share with the audience before we start wrapping it up?
Sure. I was trying to think of something that would be applicable to a broad audience, so not an engraving tip. But one thing I notice with people in handcraft, and especially as they're looking to get into maybe a different avenue of handcraft, is this focus on tooling and having just the right tooling and, the best tools and the best cabinet to keep your tools. And it almost just becomes this, almost an overwhelming thing trying to find out what's the best and who has this and how do you do this. And I found over the years, some of my very favorite tools are hand-me-down tools and tools that I picked up secondhand. So my tip is don't overlook the old stuff. Dig through the boxes and bins, buy the old files, buy the old saws. One of my favorite hand saws is a really old, rusty jeweler's saw that I made a new handle for. And I love that saw more than any expensive saw I could buy right now off of a shelf. I mean, I have both modern and old, but I think there's a lot of value in those old tools. You can get them so inexpensively often, and they really almost can be preferable to some of the modern tools. So I would say my bit of advice is just be really open-minded when you're looking for tools. Try some of the old ones. Say yes when people want to give you their old tools. I've been really fortunate in that regard of people saying, hey, I've got an extra one of these, or I have an extra one of those. Would you like one? It's just sitting around the shop, and I always say yes.
Awesome. Before we wrap it up, let's go into random question.
Oh, I'm nervous.
All right. This is a personal preference question.
Okay.
What are your thoughts about pineapple on pizza?
I am one of the weirdos who likes ham and pineapple pizza.
Me too. I'm like a massive fan, and there's people that hate it.
I love it.
The Hawaiian pizza is the bomb. I used to love that when I was growing up.
Anytime I find out somebody that I know likes a Hawaiian pizza, I will find an excuse that we can have a pizza night just so we can get our own pizza, because I never get to get a Hawaiian pizza because nobody else likes it.
I used to get like the pizza with the lot, and that had like usually pineapple and everything, and there was like an inch thick of ingredients on the top. But I was like, yeah, extra pineapple, and people were like, what have you done?
That's such a funny question, but I do. I love the sweet and salty and savory. I very much am a fan of a pineapple pizza.
Love it. Awesome. All right. Let's wrap it up. Where can people find you?
I have a website, jbowerengraving.com, and I also have a Facebook page and an Instagram page under
Awesome.
the same name.
Yeah, and I will put links to all of those guys. So if you want to just check out the show notes, you can see all the links there. I want to say thank you to everyone for listening. Before you go, jump on Instagram and Insta stalk Jennifer, and smash her DM inbox and all the other awesome things you guys are going to do. Be sure to go tell a friend about this podcast if you found it was awesome. I know a lot of you guys are listening every single week and still haven't told your friends. And I just want to say, like I've said before, if you are on the podcast, I would want people to share your story as well, and I'm sure you guys want that as well. So please be sure to share the podcast, and let's get these lesser known, makers heard, and let's help build each other up. If you want to be one of the cool kids and join the GA Nation, head over to Patreon. Otherwise, you can just help just as much by, creating a hit rap song mentioning how brilliant this podcast is, or writing in driftwood on your local beach. Make ideas reality rules, and then go to Google Earth to make sure it's there. If you want to send me any DMs, please send them to @GarageAvenger on Instagram. I will, of course, answer it. I take pride in making sure that I answer all your DMs. And I'm really, really grateful for all the 3 listeners to listen to this podcast. Please go check out Jennifer Bower at J Bower Engraving on Instagram. And of course, I'll put the link to her website as well. Until next time, keep pushing yourselves, keep ballsing up things, keep learning, get inspired, and I'll catch you on the flip side. There you go.
Okay. I have to get a picture of our screen here, so if I don't post it, it didn't happen.
That's so true. Thanks for listening, guys. If you dig the show, head over to Patreon. There you'll find all the pre-podcast chats where we talk real dirty, and you get early access to all the podcasts before anyone else gets to hear them. There is a link in the show notes. Please go check that out. I'd love to have you on board and join the GA Nation. Thank you all again so much for listening. I love you guys. Hope you have an awesome week.